All right. Good evening, folks. Thanks for coming in this rainy weather and cold, and thanks for you folks checking us out online. We're in Exodus, and we pick up with chapter 2 tonight. Now, a man of the house of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. So some people say, that kind of seems sort of strange because it looks like here this guy married this woman and she gave birth to a son. So some people say, oh, well, he was the oldest, and then you read down there and his sister stood at a distance. So what's going on here? Exodus chapter 6 and Numbers 26 make it seem that Aaron is the oldest and Miriam was the youngest. But here there's no mention of Aaron, and Miriam is older than Moses. Don't worry about it, okay? He had a couple of siblings that were born sometime during his lifetime or shortly before. We don't really get hung up on that stuff. But remember, you might have had some northern tribes told it one way, some southern tribes told it the other way. It does not matter about his siblings' birth order. That's not the point of the story, nor has anything to do with your salvation. Okay. Verse 5, Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her slave girl to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she said. So it's Pharaoh's daughter. They think that's probably a daughter of a concubine. If it was a daughter of a princess, she probably would have been in the royal court and not even allowed outside. But Jewish legend has it that this daughter was cured of leprosy when she opened the basket. That's not in the Bible, it's a legend. And it wasn't lost upon these Jewish listeners of these stories that an Egyptian woman had pity on this Hebrew baby. Verse 7, Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you? Yes, go, she answered. And the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you. So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, I drew him out of the water. Okay. So verse 7 says, then his sister, whereas back in verse 2 made it sound as if, maybe he was the firstborn. Again, just don't get hung up on that. But in what's important here, in ancient Hebrew thinking, as well as in even modern Middle Eastern thinking, ethnic solidarity is established by the nursing of an infant. So, according to that thinking, that had he been nursed by an Egyptian woman, he really wouldn't have been able to identify as a Hebrew. But as it was, he was nursed not only by his mother, but a Hebrew woman, so his ethnic identity was that of a Hebrew. And as a deliverer, he would be totally Hebrew. But it also shows a little ruse on the Egyptians, getting his mother to nurse her own son. So the name Moses there, that last says, she named him Moses, saying, I drew him out of the water. The name Moses means to draw out. And so the name was prophetic. Not only did this Egyptian woman draw him out of the water, but he would go on to draw his people out of Egypt. Verse 11. One day, after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were and watched them and their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Glancing this way and that, and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day he went out and saw 2 Hebrews fighting. he asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" The man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "What I did must have become known." When Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. All right, so the Midianites were nomadic people. Moses had never lived in such a way. He lived a life of comfort, but he was about to spend about 40 years of his life living as this nomad or semi-nomad before he would become the leader of the Hebrews. The Hebrews would then live for about 40 years as semi-nomads. We often say, oh, they were lost in the wilderness. They weren't lost. They knew exactly where they were. They just weren't yet ready or prepared or able to go into the promised land. So they were nomadic people. But his life in Midian that he was about to partake on was God's way of preparing him to lead a group of people who were not nomads into the nomadic lifestyle. So these Midianites lived east of the Jordan River, down through the eastern part of the Arabian or Sinai Peninsula, and this would have made Moses very familiar with the exact area where the Hebrews are going to be living some years from then. Now the Midianites were descendants of Abraham. They were descended from Abraham and his second wife, Keturah. That's in Genesis 25. This is important to note that the Midianites were descended from Abraham. It's going to be important several chapters later when we look at the development of the Jewish religion during their time as nomads. Verse 16. Now a priest, okay, well, back up. Where did Moses sit down at? Oh, well, I bet a couple people fall in love, don't you? It always happens in the Old Testament at the well. Yeah, that's just the genre. It's like a Western. Now a priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came to draw water and to fill the troughs to water their father's flocks. Some shepherds came along and drove them away, but Moses got up and came to their rescue and watered their flocks. It's like doo-doo-doo-doo, and Clint Eastwood's walking. Come on, man, this is good stuff. So well is the central part of the hero story. Isaac met Rebekah in Genesis 24 at a well. Jacob met Rachel in Genesis 29 at a well. And so this next verse implies that it was a daily routine that these shepherds were chasing the women away. Verse 18. When the girls returned to Reuel, their father, he asked them, "Why have you returned so early?" So in other words, this must have been happening. They answered, "An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds." So he looks like an Egyptian because he's lived like an Egyptian almost his entire life. He dresses like one, and he was speaking like one. He spoke their language. "An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds. He even drew water for us and watered the flock." "And where is he?" he asked his daughters. "Why did you leave him? Invite him to have something to eat." So the duty of hospitality is sacred in many cultures. It was sacred in the ancient people there. To have someone be generous and chivalrous to your family demanded that you show them hospitality. Besides, Jethro could tell that this was no ordinary stranger, and he's got 7 daughters, and he probably like to be rid of at least one mouth to feed. So this is what's going on. Verse 21. Moses agreed to stay with the man who gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage. Zipporah gave birth to a son, and Moses named him Gershom, saying, "I have become an alien in a foreign land." Well, you get the Reader's Digest version there. Things happen quickly. One verse, he strolls into town. The next verse, he's married and got a son already. The name of his son, Gershom, means an alien there. Incidentally, as of yet, there is no formal Hebrew or Jewish religion. Just keep that in mind. Did Moses break a commandment? There were no commandments, okay? So these really predates any formal Judaism or religion. In fact, in Judaism, the marriage of Moses and Zipporah may have been prohibited because she wasn't a Jew. But at this point, neither is Moses. But remember, to become no longer an alien, all you got to do is have the same God, and then you're no longer a foreigner. Verse 23. During that long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. So, during that long period, it says, your translation may say in the course of many days, or it came to pass. We're not told exactly, but traditionally we believe he spent 40 years in Egypt, 40 years in Midian, and 40 years leading the Hebrews in the desert. So don't get hung up on the exact dates and whatnot. Chapter 3. So in the Old Testament, and especially the Pentateuch, or the first 5 books, I've shared with you that, we have these sources where we've got some southern tribe stories, northern tribe stories, and such. I say this just because we've encountered the word L-O-R-D, we call Lord. That is a translation of the Hebrew word what? Yahweh. Whenever you see L-O-R-D in capital letters in the Old Testament, that is a translation of the Hebrew word Yahweh. But a lot of scholars, I don't know, I'm just throwing it out there, think that the word was actually not used much at all until the time of Moses. Be that as it may, we don't know, but there is going to be a lot of formation of their religion, a lot of formation. Verse 1. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses is very comfortable. He's settled into a shepherd's life. He's got a wife, got a kid, got no desire to be a hero. He's just living a nice, peaceful life. Moses' father-in-law is a what? He's a priest. That's going to be important to remember later. Verse 2 says, an angel of the Lord appeared. Some ancient text and Christian interpreters, some Christian interpreters looking at ancient texts believe that this was Jesus. Maybe it was, I don't know. So he's on the mountain of God, Mount Horeb, but what's another name for that mountain? Yeah, and why do we have 2 different names? Different tribe, different stories, right. There's places here in Bradley County, there's places in every county. If you talk to one family that's been here a long time, they're going to call it something. You talk to another family that's been here a long time, they're going to call it something. So, Moses is on Mount Sinai, Mount Horeb, and he's already experiencing God there. So he's going to know the area well. He's going to know that he can experience God there many years later, or some years later, when he returns with the Hebrews. So God is using all of these experiences of his life to prepare him as his role as a leader. So I like this verse 3. So Moses thought, I'll go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord said that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And at this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. So God identifies himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, how did Moses know who those dudes were? Huh? I mean, did he grow up as a Jew? Who told him the stories? You guys just don't question stuff like that. I'm glad. You just read it and accept it. No, I mean, I always asked those questions when I was younger. Maybe he heard them from the Hebrews. He did get out and about. But who was a priest of Midian? And he was descended from Abraham. He would have known these stories, okay? So Jethro helped shape his son-in-law, and he would continue to help shape his son-in-law in some very big ways that we will find out, if not tonight, certainly next week. So it was appearing, so how long had it been since Joseph? 400 years. So and God's just like, now I'm going to remember him. So did God just forget about him? What was up with God for 400 years? Look. It may have appeared that God hadn't done much in 400 years, but God had been doing for 400 years exactly what God promised God would do, and that the people would multiply and become an ethnic group, become a people, and that's what had happened. So sometimes we can look at a situation and think God's not really in this, when in fact God really is. God really is, and God was in that situation. Verse 7. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I'm concerned about their suffering. So I've come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I, that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I'll be with you, and this will be look, this is really one of my favorite past verses in this whole story. And God said, hey, I'm going to give you a sign that I've sent you. When you've brought the people out of Egypt, you'll worship God on this mountain. Did you catch that? How would you like God to tell you to do something big? And God says, I'll give you a sign. After you do it, this will happen. I kind of think Moses was like, I'm not so sure about that. I'm not so sure about that. Yes, we do. Right now, in advance, and even then we're going to argue with God, which is sort of what happens. We'll see. So who am I? That's the question Moses asked in verse 11. That's a common question among godly people. You know, today I preached about the harvest and how we are supposed to share the message of Jesus with the world. And, you know, who am I? Who am I? Well, Hebrews chapter 5 and 6 says, well, you're somebody who ought to be doing this. You ought to be teaching. But who am I? It's just you know, we're plagued with doubt, self-doubt. And so, anyway, verse 13. Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you, and they ask, what is his name? And what shall I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name by which I am to be remembered from generation to generation. So some scholars think that was the big reveal of Yahweh. But who is Moses afraid of talking to at this point? Not Pharaoh. He's not afraid of Pharaoh right here. Who's he afraid of? Yeah, the Israelites. I mean, he might have been an Israelite by blood, but he certainly wasn't an Israelite by culture. And he doesn't know their practices, he's not familiar with it. So who am I to go talk to them? Names are important in the Bible. We've seen that. We'll continue to see that. When Jacob wrestled with God, he wanted to know his name. It's significant that God answers Moses, and the name he gives him is significant. The answer given here in verse 14, it's translated in various ways. I am who I am what I am, I will be what I will be. I am because I am. But they all focus and center around I am. So who is God? Well, God is what is and what was and what will be. His essence is in all that is created, and all that is created has come from God. I am. All right, verse 16. Go assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord, that's Yahweh, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, appeared to me and said, I've watched over you, I've seen what has been done to you in Egypt, and I have promised to bring you up out of your misery in Egypt into the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. The elders of Israel will listen to you. Then you and the elders are to go to the king of Egypt and say to him, the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Let us take a 3-day journey into the desert to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless a mighty hand compels him. So I'll stretch out my hand and strike the Egyptians with all the wonders that I will perform among them. After that, he'll let you go. And I will make the Egyptians favorably disposed toward this people, so that when you leave, you will not go empty-handed. Every woman is to ask her neighbor and any woman living in her house for articles of silver and gold and for clothing, which you will put on your sons and daughters, and you will plunder the Egyptians. All right. Here in chapter 4, Moses is going to be taught the signs or the manner of signs that he is to perform if he's going to be believed by the Egyptians. We have in verses 1 through 9, he's turning a rod into a snake and back again. He has his hand turned leprous and back again, which, by the way, he didn't do in Egypt. And then he has turning water into blood. Verse 1. Moses answered, what if they do not believe me or listen to me and say the Lord did not appear to you? Then the Lord said to him, what's in your hand? Staff, he replied. The Lord said, throw it on the ground. Moses threw it on the ground. It became a snake, and he ran from it. Well, Moses was afraid of snakes. What do you know? And the Lord said to him, reach out your hand and take it by the tail. So Moses reached out and took a hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. This, said the Lord, is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of the fathers, the God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, has appeared to you. Then the Lord said, put your hand inside your cloak. So Moses put his hand inside his cloak, and we took it out. It was leprous like snow. Now put it back into your cloak, he said. So Moses put his hand back into his cloak, and when he took it out, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. Then the Lord said, if they do not believe you or pay attention to the first miraculous sign, they may believe the second. But if they do not believe these 2 signs or listen to you, take some water from the Nile and pour it on dry ground. The water you take from the river will become blood on the ground. So this sort of models what will happen, at least 2 of them, but they play out differently. So we have Moses questioning God, who am I to do any of this stuff? God shows him, well, you know what? With me, Moses, you can do some mighty things. So do you think that Moses would have been impressed by God and these signs by this time? I mean, really? A piece of wood turns into a snake, back into a piece of wood. I mean, you think? Well, I don't know. I mean, I think we experience things of God in our lives, and we feel pretty good, but we still doubt. We still doubt. That's the work of the devil. That's the work of the devil. Verse 10, Moses said to the Lord, O Lord, I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I am slow of speech and tongue. All right. We're gaining some insight into who Moses is, or who he has become, because he was raised as royalty. He would have had a great education. I'm sure there was a time when he probably could speak well. In the book of Acts, in the days of Jesus, you know what they thought of Moses? Well, in Stephen's speech to the Sanhedrin, this is from Acts chapter 7, Stephen says, "At that time Moses was born, and he was no ordinary child. For 3 months he was cared for in his father's house. When he was placed outside, Pharaoh's daughter took him and brought him up as her own son. Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in speech and action." So what's up with Moses now? He's got a stutter and he's just, what's up? What happened? Different audience, yeah. That's right, yeah. Well, he spent 40 years as a shepherd. You know, he hasn't spent 40 years speaking before people. He hasn't spent 40 years honing those rhetorical skills and whatnot. So, 40 years tending sheep. However, keep in mind that the 40 years tending sheep really had prepared him for a life in the desert. But don't forget who you are. See, Moses maybe forgot who he was. Now, he's going to gain his voice. He's going to gain his footing. He's going to become bold. But he kind of forgot who he was. Don't forget who you are. Verse 11. The Lord said to him, "Who gave man his mouth? Who makes him deaf or mute? Who gives him sight or makes him blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak, and I will teach you what to say." So God promises to help him. He doesn't say you're going to speak eloquently. He says, I'm going to help you. I'm going to tell you what to say. He didn't say you're not going to stutter. He didn't say that. He just said, I'm going to help you. So God can use us regardless of what we think our human limitations are. God can use us. We need not worry about our human limitations if God is the one who's told us to do it. But Moses is like us, and he's still going to argue. Verse 13. Moses said, "Oh Lord, please send somebody else to do it." Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses, and he said, "What about your brother Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. He's already on the way to meet you, and his heart will be glad when he sees you. You shall speak to him and put words in his mouth. I will help both of you speak and will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if he were your mouth and as if you were God to him. But take this staff in your hand so you can perform miraculous signs with it." Any questions about that? Does Moses know his brother? Does Aaron know his brother? Have they ever met? You guys got to ask these questions. I don't have answers for them. I just like the questions. I don't know. Obviously, we're getting the Reader's Digest version, and maybe he did know who his family was. I don't know. But anyway, so Aaron the Levite. But isn't Moses a Levite? He was, how can Aaron be a Levite and Moses not be a Levite? They're brothers. They got the same mom and dad. Well, there's a reason it's Aaron the Levite, because Aaron represents the priest. Who does Moses represent? This begins with a P, but it's not priest. Well, they are people, but prophets. We got the law and the prophets. We've got the priest and the prophets. So Aaron is the first priest. Moses was the first prophet. In Jewish tradition, priests and prophets were always two separate people. Well, just about always. Two separate people. Priests would perform the rituals for the people, and prophets would speak the word from God. Now, in Christian tradition, usually one person will perform both. In other words, a pastor will usually preach, but also perform sacraments. Okay? That's prophetic. Sacraments are priestly. But in those days, you always had different people performing the different roles of a priest and a prophet. All right. Aaron's going to come help Moses. How do you think that's going to work out? Randy? That's right, not too good. Sometimes it'll work out all right, but in Exodus 32, it's Aaron who makes the golden calf that the people go to worship. In Leviticus 10, Aaron's son will blaspheme God. And in Numbers 12, Aaron leads a mutiny against Moses. So anyway, but family dysfunction and all that. Verse 18, then Moses went back to Jethro, his father-in-law, and said to him, let me go back to my own people in Egypt to see if any of them are still alive. Jethro said, go, and I wish you well. Jethro was a priest. He might have been tuned into what was going on anyway. Now the Lord had said to Moses in Midian, go back to Egypt, for all the men who wanted to kill you are dead. So Moses took his wife and son, so he has more, put them on a donkey and started back to Egypt, and he took the staff of God in his hand. Then the Lord said to Moses, when you return to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the wonders I have given you the power to do. But I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. I bet that's giving him some confidence. Then say to Pharaoh, this is what the Lord says, Israel is my firstborn son, and I told you, let my son go so he may worship me. But you refuse to let him go, so I will kill your firstborn son. So Moses returns to Egypt, but we got this really weird story, okay? Verse 24, at a lodging place on the way, the Lord met him, we believe that to be Moses, and was about to kill him. But Zipporah took a knife, a flint knife, cut off her son's foreskin, touched Moses' feet with it. Surely you are a bridegroom of blood to me, she said. So the Lord let him alone. At that time she said bridegroom of blood, referring to circumcision. So, I don't know. Ken, you want to explain that to us? Okay. These verses are very strange to us and to our modern minds. They don't make much sense. There's evidence that maybe this was originally told of Moses being confronted by a demon. In other versions of the story, Moses is the one who is circumcised by Zipporah, not their son. But the point that the Hebrews would take from the story is this. God confronts Moses because Moses had not kept the covenant of circumcision. Whether it was with Moses or whether it was with his son. God confronts Moses. It's a strange story. The details are lost in antiquity. But God confronts Moses because he had not kept the covenant of circumcision. The Midianites, who Moses had been living with for decades, didn't practice circumcision. So Moses had compromised for the sake of his family. Well, we're living here in Midian. I'm not really much of a Jew. I grew up with Egyptians. We're not going to worry about this tradition and this ritual. And God is like saying, no, you're going to uphold this tradition and ritual. All right. But why does Zipporah perform the circumcision? Maybe she recognizes the seriousness of Moses' call even more than Moses does. We don't know. Plus, if Moses were to go back or his sons were to go back and they discover that they're not circumcised, the Hebrews wouldn't have listened to them. That's what that strange little story is about. You are?
So Jethro, his father-in-law was a priest, though. Wouldn't he have followed the...
He was a priest of Midian. His mother was Keturah.
But if Moses went from the Egyptians to there, how would he know about the circumcision?
It's a good question. How would Moses known about circumcision? Spending that much time with Jethro, Jethro may have told him. I mean, they knew of their other relatives. Or maybe God revealed it to Zipporah. And that's what that was all about. So one way or another, Moses was coming to learn that circumcision was a big deal. Okay. Where am I? 27. The Lord said to Aaron, "Go into the desert to meet Moses." So he met Moses at the mountain of God and kissed him. I mean, I don't know. I like to picture that. Like, hey, are you Moses? Yeah. Are you Aaron? Yeah. I don't know. Maybe. Then Moses told Aaron everything the Lord had sent him to say. And so this really does speak of some trust on Aaron's part. We don't get that part of the story. But for Aaron to have to leave, sneak out, because you know what? He was a Jew living under the oppression that the rest of them were living under. So he had to sneak out of the country to get out there to go meet his brother. So there's a little bit of faith on that part too that we don't get. Moses told Aaron everything that the Lord had sent him to say, and also about all the miraculous signs he had commanded him to perform. Moses and Aaron brought together all the elders of the Israelites, and Aaron told them everything the Lord had said to Moses. He also performed the signs before the people, and they believed. And when they heard that the Lord was concerned about them and had seen their misery, they bowed down and worshiped. Wow. They believed pretty quick, didn't they? A lot quicker than Moses did. But they'll backslide. All right, chapter 5. Afterward, Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go so that they may hold a festival to me in the desert." Pharaoh said, "Who is the Lord that I should obey him and let Israel go? I don't know the Lord, and I'll not let Israel go." Then they said, "The God of the Hebrews has met with us. Now let us take a 3-day journey into the desert to offer sacrifices to the Lord our God, or he may strike us with plagues or with the sword." So most of us don't appreciate how risky or maybe audacious this was on Moses and Aaron's part. Pharaohs were considered living gods by some, and certainly close personal friends of the gods by others. So when Pharaoh says, "I don't know the Lord," he meant it in a very real manner. Like, hey, I don't know this guy. So, but a parallel can be placed in our lives. I think there's a lot of people who don't know the Lord. Just like Pharaoh. Who is this? So, Pharaoh is going to discover who the Lord is. It's going to take a while. In fact, a lot of people think these plagues didn't happen like in 10 days or 10 weeks, but maybe 4 or 5 years or more. But he's going to come to find out who the Lord is. So when the world, most of the world that doesn't know who the Lord is, they got to find out from us. Don't go around causing plagues, but they got to find out from us. This is the only way people who say, "I don't know who the Lord is," are going to find out who the Lord is. Okay. So there's some interesting things to think about this story. Would Moses have ever encountered Pharaoh if he had not run away to live in the desert? So that seems like a bad chapter of his life. He gets into a little trouble, he runs away to hide, ends up out in the desert, ends up as a lowly shepherd. But had that not happened, I doubt, as part of Pharaoh's court, he wouldn't have confronted him. So sometimes we need to encounter God to work through some issues, just like Moses needed to encounter God to work through some issues. All right. So Pharaoh not only objects to a 3-day holiday to worship God, he wants them to work harder. Verse 4, but the king of Egypt said, Moses and Aaron, why are you taking the people away from their labor? Get back to your work. Then Pharaoh said, look, the people of the land are now numerous, and you're stopping them from working. And that same day, Pharaoh gave the order to the slave drivers and foremen in charge of the people. You're no longer to supply the people with straw for making bricks. Let them go and gather their own straw, but require them to make the same number of bricks as before. Don't reduce the quota. They are lazy. This is why they're crying out, let us go sacrifice to our God. Make them work harder for the men so that they keep working and pay no attention to lies. Then the slave drivers and the foremen went out and said to the people, this is what Pharaoh says, I'll not give you any more straw. Go and get your own straw wherever you can find it, but your work will not be reduced at all. So the people scattered all over Egypt to gather stubble to use for straw. The slave drivers kept pressing them, saying, complete the work required of you for each day, just as when you had straw. The Israelite foremen appointed by Pharaoh's slave drivers were beaten and were asked, why didn't you meet your quota of bricks yesterday or today as before? So, did God call Moses to be their spiritual leader? Answer it. Yes. So, had things gotten better or worse? Oh. Sometimes we question leaders, don't we? And we question our spiritual leaders. But sometimes things don't get better overnight, even when you're on the right track. Sometimes things don't get better overnight, even when you're obeying God. And sometimes things get worse before they get better when you're obeying God. But are you going to be faithful during that? That's the test. That's the test. Verse 15. Then the Israelite foreman went and appealed to Pharaoh. Why have you treated your servants this way? Your servants are given no straw, yet we are told make bricks. Your servants are being beaten, but the fault is with your own people. Pharaoh said, lazy, that's what you are, lazy. That is why you keep saying, let us go and sacrifice to the Lord. Now get to work. You will not be given any straw, yet you must produce your full quota of bricks. The Israelite foremen realized they were in trouble when they were told, you're not to reduce the number of bricks required for you each day. When they left Pharaoh, they found Moses and Aaron waiting to meet them, and they said, may the Lord look upon you and judge you. You have made us a stench to Pharaoh and his officials, and have put a sword in their hand to kill us. So things go bad, and they go to their spiritual leaders and say, it's your fault. Who should they have confronted? Well, first they confronted the political leader. So things go bad, they go to the political leader. Pharaoh, they don't get any satisfaction. They go to the spiritual leader, Moses. Who should they have gone to first? Yes. But they don't. They don't, because they want to find someone to blame. Always go to God first. Doesn't mean that we don't look to spiritual or worldly leaders, but let's look to God first. Verse 22. Moses returned to the Lord and said, O Lord, why have you brought trouble upon these people? Is this why you sent me ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak your name? He has brought trouble upon this people, and you have not rescued your people at all. So Moses, he does go to God, but he's forgotten God's promise. God told him this would happen. I'm going to harden his heart. So, we got to trust God during the difficult times. All right. Shall we do chapter 6 before we go? Oh, you sound pretty excited. All right, we'll jump right in. Then the Lord said to Moses, now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Because of my mighty hand, he will let them go. Because of my mighty hand, he will drive them out of this country. God also said to Moses, I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob as God Almighty, but by my name, the Lord, I did not make myself known to them. See, this is what I was saying earlier. A lot of people think that the word Yahweh was just now beginning to be used. So at this time, they began to call God Yahweh, which we have as Lord. We don't really have a personal name, you and I, for God. We use a lot of adjectives, almighty, everlasting. But Jesus said we could call him what? Daddy, Abba. All right. So theologically, I think up to this point, it seems like Moses might have been more impressed with the power of Pharaoh than he was with the power of God. The story of Moses isn't just about the exodus of the people, but how you and I should come to trust the power of God. Moses saw things only God can do, and eventually his faith did grow. So, have you ever had anything happen in your life that only God can do? I mean, I look at some of you out here that I know personally, and I know some miraculous things in your life. So, yeah, that's how our faith can grow. Verse 4. I also established my covenant with them to give them the land of Canaan, where they lived as aliens. Moreover, I have heard the groaning of the Israelites, from whom the Egyptians are enslaving, and I've remembered my covenant. So in the following verses, it just comes to you free of charge. We have 7 I will promises from God. Verse 6. Therefore say to the Israelites, I am the Lord, and I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them. I will redeem you with an outstretched arm and with mighty acts of judgment. I will take you as my own people, and I will be your God. Then you will know that I am the Lord your God, who brought you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. And I will bring you to the land I swore with uplifted hand to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to you as a possession. I am the Lord. All right. Verse 9. Moses reported this to the Israelites, but they didn't listen to him because of their discouragement and cruel bondage. Discouragement. Man, that keeps us from hearing a good word from anybody, whether from a friend or from God. So, discouragement is a bad thing. You know, when I lead prayers, I always pray that our church leaders would never be discouraged. We need to pray that for one another too, that we will never be discouraged. These Jews living in Egypt were thinking like slaves. Thinking like slaves. But Paul tells us in the book of Romans that we did not receive a spirit that makes us fearful, but a spirit of sonship of God. Beginning in verse 10, we have Moses and God speaking again. Moses objecting to him being used by God. What we had in chapter 4 was from one source. This seems to be similar, but now they're in Egypt. So we had this conversation back in the desert, and now we're in Egypt. Verse 10. Then the Lord said to Moses, go tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to let the Israelites go out of the country. But Moses said to the Lord, if the Israelites will not listen to me, why would Pharaoh listen to me, since I speak with faltering lips? Now the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron about the Israelites and Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he commanded them to bring the Israelites out of Egypt. These were the heads of their families. All right, so the following verses are genealogies. Genealogies are important. They were important really to the Jews after the time of the exile. They wanted to show the purity of their people. So Moses and Aaron are 4 generations removed from Jacob. Jacob was Moses' great-great-grandfather. So verse 16. These were the names of the sons of Levi, and Levi's dad was Jacob. So these were the sons of Levi according to their records. Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. Levi lived 137 years. The sons of Gershon by clans were Libni and Shimei. The sons of Kohath were Amram, Izhar, Hebron, Uzziel. Kohath lived 133 years. The sons of Merari were Mali and Mushi. I love those names. These were the clans of Levi according to their records. Amram married his father's sister Joabed, who bore him Aaron and Moses. Amram lived 137 years. So each of these three clans that they talked about, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari, will later have specific duties. Well, their descendants would have specific duties in the temple. These are the priests within Judaism. There are priests within Judaism still today that can trace their lineage back to those three families. So this chapter closes with a call again of Moses. It's in Egypt, not in Midian. Now, when the Lord spoke to Moses in Egypt, he said to them, I am the Lord, tell Pharaoh, king of Egypt, everything I will tell you. But Moses said to the Lord, since I speak with faltering lips, why would Pharaoh listen to me? So, do you believe that God intends for us to fail? Do you believe that God would set us up to fail? Then why do we doubt God? But we do. We do. We're human. All right, we'll quit there for tonight. Any comments, questions? Yes, David. Yes, if you're watching online, the question, there was a comment really that while all these plagues were going on, God wasn't just changing Pharaoh, although I don't know if Pharaoh ever really changed, he just got tired of it. But bigger thing is that the Jews were learning to trust Yahweh and to trust Yahweh's prophet Moses. A good point. Hadn't thought of it that way. No, I think, Chris, during that time, were they called Hebrews? I think the Egyptians called them Hebrews, more of a derogatory, wasn't it?
Pharaoh refers to them as Israel.
Okay.
What it's saying in the scripture we read tonight.
So your guess is as good as mine. I guess Israelites, being descended from Jacob, whose name was also Israel. So I guess to answer your question, yeah, they are called Israelites because of their being descended from a man whose name got changed to Israel, but we don't really think of them as Israelites living in the promised land with the Ten Commandments, with the law, with the prophets and all that. They're not a formal religion. They're more of just an ethnic group. Yeah, loosely they did. They had family structures. They may have had some dietary laws at this time, but probably not strict. They did have the sign of circumcision, but as we will see in the chapters coming up, there was a lot of formation about to happen that hadn't happened yet. So, yeah, I mean, they were a distinctive group of people. But maybe they weren't even calling the name Yahweh yet. Maybe it was just this God that our ancestor used to worship. So. No, but just they were all of the clan of Israel, I guess, because they were descended from Jacob. So my point is they probably were called Israelites, but when we think of the word Israelite, we really think of these people who live in Israel. They weren't that yet. They weren't that yet. But God was shaping them to be that. So. Yes, sir?
Well, I mean, they were
Well, this is, well, not when we start reading on.
But we're not even monotheistic today like we should be.
True.
But what I'm saying is that promise that Abraham had already been made.
Yeah, they were supposed to be monotheistic.
So they were distinct in that way from the Egyptians already.
Right.
That they did not worship the variety of gods that the Egyptians did. Now, you're right, they did not have all of the rituals of worship yet, but they did have a distinct identity that they were these odd people that only believe in one God that has created all things. So, because otherwise, there would have been nothing for Moses to distinguish them from the Egyptians on anyway. Because he comes to Pharaoh saying, the one God we worship is the God, greater than the multiple gods of Egypt. So I do think that the monotheistic part, though, was fairly stable.
Okay. All righty. We will pick up in chapter 7 next week. All right? Let's pray. Gracious God, we give you thanks for the blessings of this day. Thank you, Lord, that you are always faithful. Even when we think things have taken a turn, you're there. You're with us. Help us, Lord, to be patient, that we might prayerfully consider what we are being taught, even during the times of trial. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, thanks for coming.